Hey guys, Emma here, coming on today to talk to you about how does one become an addict when you are raised in a healthy environment, do very well overall, and by all means, in the looks of it, life is headed in the right direction for you and things are going quite well. And then somehow you end up becoming an addict, maybe an IV addict, you become homeless, things like that. I think that, I know this is a way more common experience than many people like to think or know. And it absolutely would be very confusing and perplexing if you are not an addict yourself. So that's what this video is about. How does that happen? How does one go from having a successful job or, getting straight A's in school, etc., to becoming a zombie of a person in active addiction? I'm going to tell you. I'm going to give you my personal experience, of course. I will say I've met, hundreds of addicts at this point that have this story through being in recovery for a while and from working in recovery. I see it's incredibly common. You see people who didn't touch substances until they were much older in life, like they'd already had an established career or had children. That is very common, and honestly, I see a trend that addicts are honestly some of the smartest, most passionate, compassionate, just intelligent people that I've met. But those things do not make you immune to addiction. I feel like intellect and the desire for control are things that often hinder recovery. So here's my experience with this, and then I'll give you some insight in that. So I grew up in the suburbs of DC, very nice area. My family were by no means poor. When I was younger, I thought we were something like that because I was surrounded by incredibly wealthy people, and we were also not wealthy by any means. But it's just wild to me now. I was living in a world surrounded by extremely wealthy children. And we didn't really go on vacation. We didn't go outside of the country. We didn't have all the brand new, flashy, crazy stuff everyone else had. I didn't have a cell phone, and I got a flip phone originally. Like, just stuff like that, where it was like, it's very privileged things altogether. Like, I was raised in an amazing household. It was not perfect. My parents did not have a good relationship, and there was a lot of chaos and difficult things going on in the household, but I had two parents that loved me immensely and still do. I was never abused in any form, and I was given numerous opportunities. Especially my mom is a really great mom who, really put aside her hopes and dreams to raise me and my siblings. And she was an extremely involved parent and was so creative, and really she paid attention to our struggles, and she's a teacher herself. So I feel very lucky to have had a mom like that really went out of her way to try to figure out, what the issues were I was experiencing, instead of just shaming them away or being like, just get over it. So I really did have a wonderful upbringing. I really did. It was like I had every opportunity. So I did extremely well in school, even though, as I've talked about in other videos, I have ADHD, and I had very severe anxiety since I was little, like panic attacks at a very young age, was on anxiety meds at age 8, like just very extreme. So I struggled a lot in school. I struggled with social relationships more than anything. But I was also very intelligent, and I was still able to get straight A's, very good grades, despite those struggles. In high school, I got into this special research program that was a 4-year-long program, so entirety of high school, and it was college research, public speaking, and you basically do these intensive research projects that are super cool because they get to be on whatever you want. You basically do multiple trial ones, and then you spend the last 2 years of high school working on your final project that you then present to the entire school. And so I was separated from the rest of the high school in these separate classes with the kids that were the smartest in the school. And those classes were harder than the college courses I've taken. I'm not going to lie. I thought college was going to be horrible, but no, those were extremely hard. But I managed to do well. I didn't get straight A's anymore, but I got all A's and B's, and I was by all means doing very well. I got my first job when I was 15. I worked really hard at it, even though I would have crippling panic attacks. And I had a lot of friends. I grew up extremely involved in the church, in the Presbyterian church. I was at church 4 days a week, like youth group. And then I did youth group service events, or we traveled to other parts of the U.S. Not far sometimes, but I only went to like Pennsylvania and stuff, but it was amazing getting to work with the homeless. Those were my early on, the only spiritual experiences I'd ever felt. And I had just a lot of friends, really close friends that I did things with, and just enjoyed my life. So all those things considered, it would be very perplexed. You wouldn't imagine that by the time I was, 18, I would be homeless and, no job, no college. And then several years later, I would be a intravenous meth addict and a crackhead. You wouldn't imagine those things. I will say trauma is the root of addiction pretty much always. So I do have my own trauma. But a lot of the time that trauma is child abuse, especially child sexual abuse. It has a horrific, lifelong, devastating impact. Will go down for generations, really. So I just wanted to say, though, even if you don't have that black and white, or grow up in a household where you're starving, neglected, those things, it makes more sense how those people become addicts, especially if they're raised by addicts who aren't in recovery. It just gets passed down. But that stuff can get passed down even when you do have supportive parents and a supportive environment. My dad is an alcoholic who was a dry drunk for a long time. And his whole side of the family are all addicts who have never gotten clean and sober. So I saw that growing up, but it wasn't directly in my house. My mom went out of her way to protect me and my siblings from that. So to limit our exposure to this behavior. But, I still saw it, and I was very, it's confusing and honestly quite scary as a child. But I still, I never in a million years would have thought I would become an addict, Never. That was never on my radar. No, you're I will never, I'd see my grandpa and be I would never, he's out of control. He's scary. I don't want to be around him. I will never be like that. And that's how all addicts feel, really, when they're younger growing up. So, addiction is formed by a variety of components, I believe, that come together. Genetics is a big one, which, being genetically predisposed to addiction is pretty common. And for me, it's on both sides of my family, but it's especially rampant on my dad's side. And then there are behavioral, mental, emotional triggers, your environment, the people that you're around, getting exposed to the drugs themselves, going through a stressful time in your life, pain. There's all these different triggers that kind of culminate together, right? And then when the flame is lit and these components are all together, it ignites. And once that ignition happens, it becomes impossible to undo. You can't just be oh shit, whoops, I wish I hadn't just opened that door. I'm just going to close it back now. And which, I will say you can do that if you are not an addict. I know a ton of people, including most of my friends in high school, their behavior was very similar to mine in high school with the drug use. Some of them were getting in trouble in pretty big ways and had some pretty big consequences from their use. And I had believed that most of them were also addicts/alcoholics like me, meaning they have the disease of addiction. However, they were all just able to simply shut that door when the consequences became too great. They grew up, really, is what happened. It was after high school, once they were in college, and finding who they really were, like had gotten out of their home environments and the stress of that. They just shut the door, which is amazing. But that is the true difference between an addict and somebody that is abusing, you know, drugs and alcohol for whatever reason in their life. Usually it's connected to stress and difficulties they're experiencing in their own life. So I was very confused as to why I could never shut that door. But anyway, let's start at the beginning of the development of becoming an addict. So I did not try drugs or alcohol until I was 16. However, I had addict behavior since I was a little child. I was incredibly obsessive. I would find an outlet that was relieving to me, that was typically secretive and very obsessive, and it would take a dominance over my life that I felt unable to be in control of. My first pretty damaging maladaptive addiction was self-harm, cutting and burning myself. I started doing that because I became part of the emo scene thing. I was extremely into it for several years. And yeah, that was when it was cool to cut yourself. Like, you would give your old razors to the band members and be like, thank you for saving my life. Like, it was all fucking bullshit. And so my friends would do that. I mean, I'm talking like, you know, little cuts. And they would show them off on the wrists and be like, oh, you know, that kind of thing. So I did that, you know, to fit in. And at first I was like, why? I don't understand why this is a thing. Like, this is so weird. However, within that year, I pretty quickly realized why that is something that people struggle with. I became addicted to it pretty intensely. And it, you know, it totally changed. It wasn't like I was doing it on my wrist anymore. It was like I'm doing it on my upper thigh, hip region to cover it. And that really took over my life. And it just brought me so much relief from anger more than anything else. I'd get these intense fits of anger and rage and self-hatred, and the cutting would just miraculously take that away. But of course, I had consequences from that. My mom put me in therapy. You know, I was spending all this energy trying to hide it. And then I switched into eating disorder, which very intensely took over my life. And I pretty quickly was full-on bulimic. Once I realized that I could make myself throw up, I couldn't stop. And then it got to the point where I was restricting my food intake, to the point where the only thing I would actually consume other than gum, like I'd pretty much just chew gum all day, was apples, green apples, and baby carrots. And then I would throw those up as well. So I got down to extremely low weight. I was literally starving to death. I looked absolutely horrific. Like, I don't recognize myself. I was skinnier than I ever was in my meth addiction when I was anorexic. By far. And I was gonna die from it. And my mom was like, you're gonna go to rehab. And just so happened, at the exact same time, I got involved in a different friend group in high school who were all smoking weed. I was terrified of drugs for some reason. I was really terrified of anything that was just unknown to me at that age, in a pretty extreme way. But like, they showed me, you know, how to do it, how to smoke it. And very quickly I switched addictions over. So I was still extremely underweight for years after that, but I gained just enough weight that I wasn't literally starving to death anymore, and I looked more healthy again from smoking weed. Because I just switched addictions, so I wasn't like consumed by the eating disorder mentality anymore, but I still had pretty crippling body dysmorphia. Like, I thought I was huge once I gained that weight, even though looking back, it's terrifying how thin I was still. But anyway, so I started smoking weed. That's really how it begins for most people, weed and alcohol, because they're socially acceptable drugs. You know, so many of the people that use it, like pretty much all of my friends, which, you know, I was around like 15 other people that were smoking weed a lot. it didn't consume their life. They were able to choose, like, is this hurting me or helping me? Obviously, sometimes you make the wrong choice when you're just partying, but like they were able to make those decisions so that their life doesn't go into the toilet. You know what I mean? And from the beginning, I couldn't do that. I mean, there were signs that I was an addict right from the get-go, because I mean, I love smoking weed, but it was like as soon as I, smoked a bit, I was no longer able to talk or socialize. Like I would just get stuck in my mind, like, and like I would be hanging out with friends for hours, just like, and like responding in my head, but I couldn't talk, and I wouldn't be able to get my homework done. I really just became extremely lazy. I mean, all I wanted to do was sit there and watch TV and eat, and I didn't like that. Like I didn't like what it was doing to me. So every time before I'd go over there like to hang out, I would literally hype myself up for a long time, like repeating in my head over and over again, I'm gonna say no, I'm not gonna smoke weed, I'm not gonna smoke weed, I'm gonna say no. And then the second that I would get there, I felt like I lost control and just watched myself do it. So I remember getting this sinking feeling in my stomach, like, this isn't good. But, denial is part of addiction, so I chose to try to dwell on that as much as I possibly could. But that's really the sign, Like, I was raised with all of these totally normal circumstances, and it started in a very normal way when it comes to teenage substance experimentation, but it became a monster beyond my comprehension very quickly. What really took over, though, was when I found my drug of choice. When it comes to addiction, drug of choice is really just, no matter what your drug of choice is, if you're an addict, you understand one another and the experience of addiction. But drug of choice is typically just the thing that completely has you in its grip. And it depends on the person if that's like a downer or an upper typically. So downers are like alcohol, opiates, benzos. Uppers, meth, cocaine, Adderall, crack, shit like that. And I am an uppers girl. That's always been what I've wanted. I didn't like downers at all. Like I hated benzos. I would only use downers to try to balance out and come down a little bit, if you know what I mean. So I have a ton of videos on Adderall that you can look at. I will link it down below. But yeah, Adderall was my drug of choice. Watch the other videos. I'll talk about how I was on it as a child and break down a lot of the myths around that when it comes to ADHD and Adderall addiction. But yeah, it was like at that age, once I tried Adderall again, which, I did so with good intention of thinking this will help my ADHD. It took over me immediately, like it had never done before. And it had me in its grasp for about 6 years, for 7 years prior to that. I mean, it took over my life. It was all that I wanted, and it drove me into the ground pretty quickly. I became an alcoholic, trying to avoid to do more Adderall, and it was just this build up, right? And I mean, I lived in 7 different sober livings in 1 year. I went to 6 rehabs. I did a bunch of IOPs. I had a ton of sponsors in AA, and I was just like they call it the 30, 60, 90 dance. I couldn't get past 30, 60, 90 days of sobriety. I just couldn't. And it all came to a head in the way I think it needed to come to a head. But, I said I would never do meth, I would never do crack, I'd never do heroin or fentanyl. I was like, I'll just never do that. I mean, because, yeah, I had been around so many addicts, for, since I was 17, started treatment, that I knew all the horrors. I knew once you go down that road, you can't go back. I knew all of that. But it got to the point, after 5 years of a very intentional resistance of just being like, I will never go down that path. Never. It came to the point where I just didn't care anymore. I was like a relapse on alcohol led to like met a guy at a gas station that ended up selling me cocaine. It was bad shit too. It got to the point where I was like, I'm gonna do meth. I mean, that's how it progresses. It had been the years and the years of the disease brewing and just waiting to jump on it. And it was finally like, I just don't care. And once you enter that world, that's where all the things you say you never would do will happen. And that's how I went from a straight A student to a meth addict. I was around these people that had been in this world for a very long time that were doing really awful things to support their drug habit. That's how I learned how to shoot up. That's how I started doing fentanyl. That's how I started smoking crack. And it destroyed my life. Completely did. But I'm very grateful for it today because it's gotten me to where I am now. It has been almost a year, higher power willing, since I have used any of these substances. And I'm thrilled. Life is just, it's black and white, completely different today. But I'm very grateful for those things now. I feel like I needed to experience the intensity and the horrors of all of that. As I've talked about in other videos, I ended up having heart attacks from my meth addiction. I overdosed on cocaine, which was really horrible. I started having kidney issues at the end, and I was just, I felt like I was like on hospice dying. Like that's what it felt like. But I needed to experience that because it changed something in my brain and just woke me up to this is life and death. There's no rationalizing or trying to, create a deal with it. Like, oh, I'll do this, not that. It's like, nope, you're out of time. Do it or die. And my life has changed dramatically. I mean, it really has. Like, today I have my own place with my husband. I've got a sweet doggy who is right here. I have a job working in recovery, helping other addicts get clean, which I love. It can be very tiring, but it is extremely rewarding work. I mean, it really is. I get to make my art and do all my crazy passions. I have a car, which that's pretty big because I didn't have a car for a while. I don't have any legal issues. Like I really don't have any health issues either, which is miraculous. I'm incredibly lucky. Doctors have told me that the only thing that has prevented me from having lifelong heart problems is how young I am. Which, man, that puts it into perspective. Like, I mean, I was out of time, and I'm so grateful that I got the help that I needed. So yeah, that's just a very kind of basic look into how somebody that, by all appearances, and, from what you know about them, has been raised by good people, taught good morals and values. Like, my parents did an extremely good job with that. They did teach me how to be a good person and how to look out for others and how to be honest and all of those things, which I prioritize to this day. And I never forgot those lessons that they taught me. They've always impacted me. But the disease of addiction is truly like a demon where eventually you become so desperate that you end up breaking that moral code and you lie to hide your addiction, to try to preserve your addiction from consequences, which when you've been raised with a good moral and value system, it feels absolutely terrible. It feels horrific to act and behave that way, but you end up doing, using more to try to disguise that as well. So it is it's a grim reality, but there's hope. We do recover. It is so damn true. So yeah, let me know if there are any things you would like me to talk about, or if you have any questions or anything like that. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I will see y'all next time. Bye-bye.